Thanks, Brian. And now we bring in ESPN's original bracketology expert, Joe Lunardi, to dissect the Orange and see where they stand. And Joe, right now you have Syracuse sitting firmly as a number 6 seed. What do you think the Orange can do, though, to bump themselves up a notch or two?
What does Al Davis say in the NFL? Just win, baby. I mean, obviously a team can only control its own game, but what's really happening here is all of these teams are competing every time they go out for these seeding spots. So what Syracuse does is relative to what the teams just ahead of them and just behind them are also doing. So sometimes you can lose and stay put, and sometimes you can win and not gain, and it doesn't have anything to do with how well you're playing.
And obviously, Joe, Syracuse was much better in the first half of the season. You got those key wins against Florida, Kansas, Memphis. Second half, not quite as good. So what do you think that the regression in the second half of the season is going to do in the eyes of the voters of the committee?
I don't know that it's been regression as much as it's been the reality of how difficult it is to play and win in the Big East this year, especially on the road. I mean, look at some of the losses at Georgetown, at Pitt, at Providence, at Villanova, at Connecticut. I mean, most teams are going to lose most of those games when they play them on the road. So I think the committee will take the schedule into account and seed Syracuse accordingly.
Now, a common thing that seems to be being said right now is that the bubble teams are weaker this year than they normally are. What does that do for the Big East squads like Cincinnati, Providence, and Georgetown that right now find themselves on the bubble?
I don't know that it's weak as much as there are a lot of teams that look alike, meaning that they have flaws in their profile from an NCAA selection standpoint, and they have flaws in their game. What do you do with a team that hasn't played anybody outside its league but has 5 top 50 wins? You wait and see how they're going to finish. Providence or a Cincinnati or even a Georgetown in the Big East discussion, this year getting hot is going to be the equivalent only of maybe a 2 or 3 or 4 game winning streak at the end of the season and into a conference tournament, and that might be a decider, whereas in the past, a lot of conference tournament games have been kind of an afterthought for the committee.
Now, with Georgetown and Notre Dame, you have 2 Big East programs that were expected to be top 10 or at least top 15 squads that now are only on the bubble. So that being said, you saw the Big East Conference go from a conference that was supposed to be one of the greatest of all time to now just as good as the ACC. I mean, how far has this Big East Conference fallen in your eyes?
They're still putting 8 teams into the tournament, possibly 9 before all is said and done, which would be a record. And 7 of the teams in the Big East are projected to be seeded in the top half of the bracket with seeds of no worse than 6 or 7. That's awfully good, especially since they're likely to get 2 number 1 seeds and a number 2. You know, I'm not old enough to say best conference of all time, but I can tell you it's pretty doggone good right now.
Keeping in mind all those top seeds in the Big East Conference, what would a Big East tournament win do for Syracuse if they were to go on and win it all? What would that do for their seeding?
Well, it would certainly get them a protected seed on one of the top 4 lines of a region. I would think a 3 would be most likely in that scenario, maybe even a 2, again, depending on what all the other teams around them are doing. That would be 2 more wins in the regular season and another 4 in the Big East tournament, so that would be 26 and 8 plus the non-Division I win. That would be a pretty impressive finish.
One last question before we let you go here, Joe. The one that's on everyone's mind in Syracuse, how far can this team go?
I think Syracuse has an excellent chance to be in the Sweet 16 this year. I've liked them from the beginning. I wish they'd play a little better defense, but I'm sure Jim Boeheim has that feeling every night when he goes to sleep, particularly given the outstanding teams he's had in the past at the defensive end of the floor. Last year and this year's group, for whatever reason for Syracuse, just hasn't made that commitment and hasn't gotten the results at the defensive end. But could they win 2 or 3 games in the NCAA tournament? Absolutely.
Thanks again, Joe Lunardi, ESPN's bracketology expert, for joining us.
Okay, see you later, Scott.